who had the chance to hop over to the on the equity side to figure out what the chatter is like there? Is it a lot about taxation or what is it?
Good afternoon, Prashant. I'm going to stick to the macros. I think this was both fiscally and financially very prudent, actually.
Okay. No, absolutely. Any finer points that you can tell us in terms of food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, or the way in which expenditure has been distributed? We only asked you about the broad fiscal deficit, yes, which has come down. But any of the finer points in terms of nature of expenditure?
Yes, thanks, Lata. So a couple of things. We now have some more detail. Remember, the deficit, if you compare actuals last year to what's projected this year, goes from 5.6 to 4.9. Now, the good news is that most of this is happening through either asset sales or happening from what I call the non-contractionary component of the RBI's dividend. Because a lot of that dividend came from interest earnings on foreign assets. A lot of that dividend came from FX revaluation. So what's important is to understand when the fiscal deficit is consolidating, how much of that imparts a negative fiscal impulse on the economy, how much of that is going to be contractionary. And the good news is because a lot of the consolidation this year is happening from the RBI dividend, you get a 0.7% of GDP consolidation, but only a 0.3% in terms of contraction. A lot is happening on the revenue side, number one. Number two, I think what you're seeing is the mix on expenditures continues to be healthy. Capital expenditure compared to last year goes up further from 3.2 to 3.4%. Subsidies go down. Revenue expenditure, ex-interest and subsidies, actually goes up compared to the interim budget. So essentially what's happened is the government had about 0.4% of GDP in extra resources compared to February. Half of that went towards non-interest, non-subsidy current expenditures. Hopefully that should boost rural demand, aggregate demand. Half of that went towards fiscal consolidation.
Okay, got that. But from an employment point of view, do you think, you must have just heard Sunita Reddy saying that it gives a huge fillip to the health industry because it is employment oriented and they will actually be incentivized to take new joinees because there is some kind of an EPFO subsidy. The more number you enroll into the EPFO, that is, the more formal jobs you give, there is some 4-year subsidy that is given to those companies. Do you think this really moves the needle on employment and therefore can have multiplier effects?
A couple of things that are. One is, I just make 3 quick points. One is, as we've discussed before, the key issue for private investment is demand. Right? So we have to find a way to boost demand. Now, there is no cyclical space, as we previously discussed. Deficits have to come down. Monetary policy has limited room given what's happening globally and with food inflation. So this will have to be, how do you structurally boost demand? And the structural demand has to come either from consumption or from exports. And to structurally boost consumption, you need employment. Now, why are today's measures important? Because, as I've been writing for the last year, if you look at the last 20 years in India, India's manufacturing has been becoming increasingly capital intensive at a time when we're undergoing our demographic transition. So just when working force population is rising rapidly the last 2 decades, capital labor ratios, this is ASI data, have continued to go up. Yeah. Right? So the whole focus has to be, how do you redress the balance between capital and labor? I think today's steps are an important first step in doing that. How do we incentivize firms to hire more people and undertake less machines? Now, you'll need efforts both on the demand side and the supply side. And we saw some of that today. Yep. That there are some demand measures for firms. There are some supply measures. Skilling is important. Education is important. To be fair, this is 1,000 small steps, but some really important steps have been initiated. And I think today, the signaling is really important. That the focus in the next few years is going to be on employment, on skilling, on education, not so much on fiscal 0.5% here or there, but on what are the structural measures to redress the capital labor balance.
Okay, point taken. Sajjid Chinoy, thank you very much for sparing time in what must be a very busy hour for you with client calls. But the point is that the needle has been moved on where it has to move. And just to add to what Sajjid said, we should have been a country where labor has a huge advantage and therefore more labor is employed per unit of capital. What we were actually seeing in India, as Sajjid points out, is for every unit of output, we are actually employing more capital than even some of the capital-rich countries and labor-scarce countries. So this capital intensity has to be moved away and therefore the incentives given to employing more people is in the right direction.
Yeah.
Now, how will it play out? Whether people will set up more hospitals will not depend on the subsidy. It will depend on the demand.
Absolutely.
So the point is taken that ultimately the economy has to show that demand growth, but the government has definitely done its job on skilling.
Okay, well, we'll take a quick commercial break here. We'll come back. We'll touch upon individual stocks and sectors which are moving. Ramdev Agarwal, chairman and co-founder at Motilal Oswal, is also going to be with us on the other side. We continue the budget conversation. Stay with us.